To tell you the truth, I haven't thought a whole lot about success during the course of my life. Maybe it's because how I was raised. My parents were very successful, but they were more interested in what I was doing that might be meaningful, what I was doing that might be helpful to others. I had the best teachers in my home because they, were all imperfect parents, but they would model for me the kind of life they believed in. When my dad's company was down, he would still give huge amounts to charity. Mom was our extended family's social worker because she was a social worker by training and she was a great listener. They said, find what you can do that's meaningful for you and for others. I've really appreciated those lessons. I guess I think about those more than success.
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, and for every direct account we look after, we sponsor a child in a developing nation with food, water and education. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call, and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode. Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Russ Linden. Russ, welcome.
Good morning, Thomas. Great to see you.
It is great to see you too. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'll start with most important. My wife and I have 2 adult kids. Both made great choices in terms of who they married. All 4 of them are doing things that move the world a few inches a little bit better every so often, so that makes us feel great. 3, of course, gorgeous and brilliant grandkids. Extended family is important because I grew up with my brother in Detroit, Michigan, where 6 of my brother's 7 siblings all lived within a mile. And so we got together, we're Jewish, for all the Jewish holidays and weddings and funerals. And so to this day, for the last 30, 40 years, there's over 200 some folks in the extended family. We have family reunions every 4 years, and I help to pull those together. It's a mess because there's an old expression, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So, whatever we want to do, there's going to be people arguing both sides. It's a Jewish trait. But it's very meaningful also to see so many of the family, the next generation, who like to come to those. Professionally, Thomas, I started off in the human services world. I ran a Big Brothers program for a while, program for kids without fathers in their homes, and then a program for agency for disabled. I'm laughing because I never had an hour of management or leadership training. And a fellow who was a friend and a colleague who ran a similar agency looked at me the day I told him I was leaving. This was after 5 years of running the agency. We got some things done somehow. And he said, Russ, you didn't do a bad job, and just think what you could have done if you knew what you were doing. A little kind of sharp elbow guy humor there. But I thought about it, Thomas, and I realized he wasn't wrong because I made some mistakes and I'd never had, as I said, a drop of leadership training. So I went back and got a doctorate in organizational leadership, and I was delighted and kind of stunned, frankly, to see that there really were some principles and concepts that made sense. And so that was mid-'80s, and I've been consulting, writing, and teaching leaders and managers, mostly in the public and nonprofit sectors, ever since then, about leadership, change. Collaboration is one of the biggest ones, especially since 9/11 in our country, seeing all these parts of the government that had pieces of the puzzle, never put them together. Crisis leadership, and something that's been especially in demand lately, Thomas, I don't know if you've had people on your show to talk about resilience. I think a little bit maybe starting with the Great Recession and certainly with the pandemic, lots and lots of interest in resilience. To me is simple. It's how do you bounce back? Things will happen in life, right? So what can managers, leaders in our personal or business world do to keep ourselves up and help people with the bounce back? And then when I'm not working, I'm semi-retired now, so I have more time. I lead an organization called Welcoming Greater Charlottesville. We live in Charlottesville, Virginia. And our mission, Thomas, is to make the community more open and welcoming to everybody, especially to immigrants and refugees. And because there's been so much taunting and ugliness directed toward immigrants and refugees here in recent years and in other countries, we feel like it's an important mission.
Well, there's a lot of good stuff there. So thank you for the introduction. I was going to actually say, why did you decide to write a book on guidance to leaders and then also how to manage change? But the leadership part is presumably what your expertise is, and the managing change is due to everything that's going on externally. Is there anything in addition there that you'd like to add?
Well, you capture the core of it. The one thing I would add is the book is What Can We Learn from the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, as well as contemporary leaders and leadership studies about leadership and managing change. Why the emphasis on change? Briefly, when I got started, Thomas, I don't know if this was true in your country. In America, we heard a lot of people talking about how change is the only constant and it's only getting faster. You can always, assume change is happening and it's speeding up, and that was true. But 5, 6, 7 years ago, I kind of opened my eyes and thought, it's more than change is accelerating. It's change is becoming disruptive, discontinuous. Suddenly, out of nowhere in 2017, a woman used the Me Too hashtag to say a Hollywood mogul named Harvey Weinstein had molested her. Now, there had been Me Too hashtags used before. It never went anywhere. This time it took off. And happily, since then, uncounted organizations in this country are being pressured to do the right thing when a woman or a guy complains about sexual aggression. The Great Recession is kind of the mother of all disruptions. For our country, for the world, Donald Trump was an enormous disruption, changing all the rules. So to me, disruptive change is when the rules change. It's hard to predict. It's hard to anticipate. Ukraine, who would have thunk on the continent, another full-scale war. January 6th, the attacks on the Capitol. So many things that are just kind of, gobsmacking us in the face. And the Hebrew Bible has an awful lot of those kind of changes. God looks around after creating everything and says, the earth's filled with sin. So there's the great flood to wipe out almost all the life. And then God, according to the Hebrew translation, God repents that decision. God says, it didn't work out the way I wanted. God meets Abraham, and God's first words are, Abraham, go away, go to a land that I will show you. I'll make you a great people. God meets Moses and tells Moses after he's lived for 40 years in a tranquil life, go back to Egypt where you fled. You're going to lead the people out of bondage. So there's an old saying, I don't know, I'll have to track it down. Maybe you know the source, Thomas. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And there seems to be a lot of rhyming these days in terms of the kind of disruptive change we're having in what we read about in a book that was written 3,000 years ago. So all that came together. I'm Jewish, as I've said, and I go to the synagogue and I read these stories every week. And so many of them are about changes. I thought, let's see what we can learn from them as well as from people today.
All the various different, shall we say, instances that you mentioned, which are disruptive. I don't know why, but what springs to mind for me there is it that something's different, meaning change is a lot more frequent than it otherwise would be? Or is it that just we know about it more? Have you got any thoughts on that?
I love that question in part because nobody's asked me that. I would say that because of instant communications, we know an awful lot immediately. People who have written about this point out that the Civil War didn't end everywhere at the same time because word passed slowly. Not everybody had a telegraph. I think we know a lot more. Obviously, we know a lot more immediately. That can be good and bad because often what we read is just the first glance, but not actually what plays out or fake news. But we're definitely bombarded more. It's hard to read headline news these days, watch headline news. There's a saying in this country, tell me if you see it in Britain, local telecasters say, if it bleeds, it leads. Kind of unfortunate.
I heard that.
If it's terrible, that's what we start with.
Yeah.
But I would say, back to my example about the Me Too movement, some things that happened before, some potential disruptive changes, just didn't take off, and today they seem to. I don't know if of Donald Trump in the 1990s, I doubt that he would have had the enormous impact that he's having today, and not just in our country. He's just about to go to a conference in America, where they hosted the semi-dictator of Hungary, Orban, and they're clones of each other. Trump is following Orban's playbook. There weren't any Orbans back in the 90s, or at least very few, and now it's a real wave in your country and obviously in ours. So I think it's maybe both. Telecommunications, we hear about it more, but I think I could probably quantify more disruption now than in the past, in recent decades.
Okay, thank you for that.
Do you have a thought on that yourself?
I think your answer of it being a bit of both is, I would imagine, the right one, meaning that there are some things that we would just not have considered previously because we wouldn't have known about them. It just wouldn't have entered our mind space. And because of everything being connected due to technology, now we know about them, and now they can enter your mind space and influence your behavior, perhaps. And then the technology, which, I mean, many people are talking about it. I'm not certain many people understand it, and me being one of them. Artificial intelligence, everything speeding up and being automated. I think that is something which is going to have a considerable impact on us. So, as you say, a bit of both, I think, is a good answer.
In Silicon Valley here, our hub, one of our main hub, but one of our hubs of high tech, for 10, 12 years, Thomas, the watchword has been disrupt. So think Uber. And suddenly taxis don't look so interesting. Trying to think, B&B. What's the
Airbnb?
Airbnb, yeah. And suddenly hotels are not struggling, but they've got a different kind of competition than they ever had. And so in a lot of high-tech circles, positive disruption, aggressive competitive disruption is happening, and maybe that's a factor as well. Anyway.
Well, it ties in nicely to the topic of managing change, because as technology becomes more prominent, there's going to be more change. So I think it's well worth touching on. One thing I did want to ask you immediately about, because it kind of jumped out at me off the points that we were potentially going to cover, was what it means to have a growth mindset. So would you mind going into what that means to you, and then what the context for the book is there?
I love that question. Carol Dweck is a psychologist who's made this term famous. I don't think the concept is terribly new, but she's done a great job at kind of helping people, not just in an academic sense, but in an everyday sense, understand it. Carol argues that there's two types of mindsets. And of course, this is a continuum. None of us is all or the other. Growth mindset, fixed mindset. Growth mindset, Thomas, something I never tried before, I'll give it a chance. Fixed mindset, something I never tried before, I don't think so. Growth mindset, I might fumble and fail, but I'll learn something. Fixed mindset, I might fumble and fail, no, not me. She reports there's no difference in IQ, and in most fields, no difference in achievement, which is interesting. But the growth mindset folks are far more well positioned to deal with whether we think there's more disruption or not, to deal with change. Some of them eat it for lunch. There's a lot of research about millennials who kind of get bored if things aren't changing frequently. Fixed mindset folks have a very hard time in this environment. Just a little PS on this. We may want to come back to this. Part of the research I did for the book, Thomas, was to learn from neurologists, neuropsychologists, through something called fMRIs, MRIs that scan the brain and tell us what functions hit us where. That our brains, to summarize, overly simplify maybe, our brains are wired, among other things, for predictability and control. Our brains want to know what's about to happen, and certainty, what's happening now, certainty, predictability. And our brains like it when we're in control. When we're surprised, our brains are not pleased. What are we finding these days? It's full of surprises. So Carol argues that a growth mindset is, first of all, something that all teachers should know about. And she does a lot of work with public schools. She's taught teachers to use the term "not yet." Instead of "you got an F on this, Billy," "not yet." You didn't do well. I can't lie to you, Billy, but I've got implied as I got confidence. You can get there. There's a whole district in Washington where the principal won the Principal of the Year award, and one of the many changes she made was everybody has this grading scale, A, B, C, D, and not yet. Growth mindsets. It's a classic phrase for many of us. Mistakes are to be learned from. Fixed mindset mistakes are to be avoided. Example, one of my many cousins, I had 18 first cousins, brilliant guy, I loved him, great attorney. And his brother told me that my cousin never lost a case in court. And I said, that's incredible. And he practiced for decades, Thomas. I said, how could that be? And his brother said, well, Russ, he is brilliant, but he never took a case unless he was sure he could win it. So that's the fixed mindset. And I think most managers in most areas these days and leaders would like to have staff who have more of a growth mindset, who are willing to take a chance, knowing that their boss will have their back. I could say more, but does that give you a sense of how I see it, how Carol Dweck talks about it?
Yeah, definitely. I was interested to hear you say that it, at least in principle, doesn't have an impact on achievement, because I think people who would like to pick up a growth mindset or choose to have one over the other would do it because of the potential for more achievement. If it's not based on achievement, what would you say the benefit is there?
What's the benefit of having a growth mindset if it doesn't help you achieve more?
Yeah.
I'll speak for myself. I love to learn. For years, I would look at the New Yorker magazine only in doctors' offices, and I would look at the cartoons because they're clever. 5, 6 years ago, our daughter gave me a subscription to the New Yorker. The writing is so good, even though there's 8 and 10-page articles in small type, single space, Thomas. I'm reading about stuff I never would have looked at because it's great writing and I'm intrigued with it. A lot of managers and leaders, instead of what they see in academia, which in not all schools, but in many schools and departments in academia, the old phrase is, after you get your doctorate, you know more and more about less and less. You get more and more narrow, but deeper. So specialists are always going to be needed. In law schools, many law schools, they reward people who are willing to change their field, go from constitutional law to torts or something. I don't really know all those categories. There may not be any more money, but a lot of people are stimulated by the learning. I think another benefit of having a growth mindset is networks. You start to learn about something else, you try a different field. An area I teach a lot, collaboration. So collaboration, by anybody's definition, is across boundaries, whether it's internal silos or inter-organizational. If it's a complex project, you need people from different backgrounds. If you have a growth mindset, you won't just work with someone who's got a very different discipline. You'll ask them how did you come up with that? Someone has a different way of problem solving. So it may or may not provide more money in your pocket or moving up the corporate ladder. But I think there's an awful lot of people who are stimulated by learning, by getting new skills, can make you a better parent, having a broader view of what's possible. Our daughter, Becca, our older one, I still remember when she started to look for colleges when she was in 11th grade. And I said, Becca, honey, tell me, what are you looking for? And she said, that's simple. I said, really, what? She said, I want a place, Daddy, where it's rewarded to be curious. I gave her the biggest hug. I just love that. She said, I want to go somewhere where it's small, where the teachers aren't always just running back to do their research, where I can say, that was a terrific lecture. Could we have coffee and talk about that? Becca has a growth mindset. I don't know that she's risen as high as she may ever want to, but she's been eligible and chosen for a variety of different jobs. And she finds that, stimulating.
Yeah, I can see how it would benefit the person who, let's say, if you put a couple of different people in a scenario where it's changing frequently, one's a fixed mindset and one's a growth mindset, I would imagine the growth mindset person would fare much better in that scenario.
Most people, I couldn't agree more. Most people studying the pandemic in terms of impact on behavior and organizations are saying we better be adaptable. And I'm glad you said that for one other reason. One of the things I've been preaching to my clients, and it's not original with me, I'm reading this from people who have the time to do deep research dealing with the pandemic and the continual surprises, is let go of perfectionism. Let it go. If you've got some in you, just say to yourself, it's not going to work, because you're going to wait and wait and wait until it gets whatever perfect means. Don't have time to wait now. And besides, it's going to be different next week. So I think adaptability is much more the province, the nature of growth mindsets. One more thing, I tend to have a growth mindset, but I don't wake up every day looking to learn 5 new things in 5 different fields. I mean, that would be exhausting for me. So I think there's always some balance. But it's great to know how to move into the growth mindset area. Do you see yourself in that area or mix?
Interesting question. I think I did have a growth mindset, a quite considerable one, and perhaps it was out of balance a little bit more. So now I've come back a little bit to be a bit more conservative in relation to my experience of I don't know, a bit more cautious now than I was. But I certainly would fall in if you would split it in two, I'd certainly fall into the growth mindset category. Just a little bit more cautious now than I was.
Well, and there's something that's wonderful about doing the same thing you've been doing for a while and knowing that you can do it well, and not get flustered, and just the pleasure of mastering something. Yeah.
Well, I liked the fact that you reference you use the term contemporary leaders in the book and what you learned from them. Anyone that what was your favorite person to study in that particular instance?
Do we have a few hours? There's several. Let me start with Colin Powell, who went from being a foot soldier in Vietnam to the national security advisor for Reagan to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, our force, Army, Navy, Air Force, etc., the chiefs of each of those, and then there's one chief of those, and he was the head of that. It's a great story, and this is partly about his growth mindset and something related, which is one of the things I've learned is that people who learn and grow in there and do well have to keep their ego in check. So here's a story about both keeping ego in check and having a growth mindset. I'll make it up, 1987, give or take, Reagan had him go to meet Gorbachev. Gorbachev had just taken over. Gorbachev was talking about opening things up. Glasnost, I think, was the Russian term. And there were a lot of Americans who were saying, is this real? And no lack of Americans, especially in the Reagan administration, tough on the commies, who were saying, forget about it. As my wife from New York would say, it's not real. Skeptics. So here's the story briefly. Powell meets Gorbachev. There's some niceties. Powell has some questions. And at one point, Gorbachev leans over the table and says, General, you're going to have to find a new enemy because we're ending the Cold War. Got it? And Powell later wrote and told his colleagues, I didn't smile. I didn't want to lose that enemy. That's the enemy I'd been fighting against for 20 years, damn it. I wanted to beat him. What do you mean I got to find a new enemy? He was pissed and frustrated, but kept his ego under control. He later said, I was just too competitive. And the growth mindset kicked in, and he said, well, if that's the talk he's given, and he's saying it publicly to the Russian people, the Soviets, we got to figure out if there's anything to this. And he just went consulting with a whole variety of people, not just people expert on the Soviet Union, people who know about change, people who know about Russia's culture, people who had studied Gorbachev's history. And when the wall came down, Powell was in a position to remake our military so it was far more adaptable because it's no longer us and them. It's a world far more complicated. So I love the way Powell was so honest and open. I didn't want a different enemy. Stay tough, but he was ready. A different and amazing, maybe the most amazing leader of the 20th century, in my view, Nelson Mandela. He was very aggressive, and he got to the point leading the African National Congress, ANC, to fight apartheid in South Africa, when there was so much violence being perpetrated on the blacks, which were 90% of the country, by the whites who ran everything. He was leading the part of the ANC that got very tough and militant and did violence, not killing people, but blowing up things that the government cared about. Government was threatened naturally. Long story short, he's sent into prison with some of his colleagues for like 27 years. And he later told his biographer, I went to prison an angry, resentful guy, but I came out a mature man. So in prison, growth mindset, he learns the language of the Afrikaners. Some of them were illiterate. They couldn't read a newspaper. So he would get an Afrikaans newspaper. And without trying to pretend that he was teaching, he would say, hey, did you see this in the newspaper? Just to make it comfortable for his guards, with the guards. And he would read to them. And so they started to form relationships. He formed a bond with the guy who ran the prison because Mandela was learning about soccer, their love, and rugby. And that's what the prison warden was all about. Mandela comes out, able to talk with whites, knowing their culture, which amazed them, Thomas. They respected that because he showed respect to them. He wasn't just a militant saying, we're going to kill you. And he said to the white leaders for 4 years until they finally had free and open elections, he said, we can keep fighting each other. Nobody can win that war. Yes, you've got the guns. We got the numbers. Figure it out. He was putting it in their self-interest. And he promised them he would do everything he could to keep the blacks from exacting violent revenge. And Mandela had 5 years, not perfect by any means, but 5 good years as president, trying to help both sides realize we can only do this together. He caught more guff from the blacks. What are you, selling out? They had this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and whites who had done terrible things, if they confessed, if it seemed sincere, they would either get a lighter sentence or maybe no sentence. People thought that was awful. Some of the blacks, some of the militants. Mandela was smarter than that. He said, if you can forgive, it's a powerful weapon. Think about, that's an exact quote, Thomas, think about the wording, powerful weapon. He's using that words with militant blacks who want to have real weapons. And he's saying forgiveness is more powerful. So I won't go on and on. I think he was a remarkable guy.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it sounds like he's impacted you quite a lot in your research. Is that right? Absolutely.
I occasionally, this is going to be strange. Being Jewish, I don't say, what would Jesus do? But I occasionally have asked myself, what would Mandela do? Not about myself, but I'm thinking of some leaders. I sometimes coach people who are running for office locally. I sometimes think, what would Mandela's answer be? And it almost always helps.
It's a great point. And in terms of leaders, I mean, nothing really springs to mind for me. Someone who is like that in our current society, anyway. But have you anyone else that's worth mentioning in your view?
Well, one of the things that I talk about in terms of dealing with change, there's a lot of ways to deal with major change. You're leading change, and you don't want people to push back. So I'm going to get to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of our great Supreme Court justices, but just a little quick story to get us there. One of the best books on change I've ever seen is called Leadership on the Line. Leadership on the Line. And Thomas, the first chapter is worth the cost of the book. They write, 2 authors, they write, people don't necessarily resist change. People resist loss. People resist loss. I put the book down and I thought, my God, that's what I've learned from my clients for years. I just never quite thought of it that way. If there's a change and certain people think they're going to benefit, or the team or the organization or the customers, usually we go along. So how do we deal with loss when we have a change that we're asking people to make and they see it as a big loss? For those who haven't read the Hebrew Bible, after Moses, with God's help, brings the people out of Egypt after 440 years of slavery, people start to complain. This is too tough. Where's the food? Where's the water? Better we went back to Egypt. You're going to make us die in the wilderness. I used to think, Thomas, such ingrates. You've got freedom, for goodness sake. Learning about change and loss helped me understand this. And the human brain, certainty, predictability, they lost all of that in the wilderness. So here's where I'm going with this. One of the ways to help people deal with expected loss is to shrink the change. Break it down into small steps, one step at a time. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's first case before a federal judge, three judges, all white males, was about sex discrimination. This is, of course, where she made not just her reputation, but enormous changes, passionate about it. Here's why it's interesting, Thomas. She chose a case that was sex discrimination against a guy. He took care of his mother. He wasn't eligible for financial benefits that a woman who took care of a parent would have gotten. Why did that matter? Because she doesn't want to threaten these male judges. She doesn't want to come across as we're changing the world, shrinking the change one step at a time. Let's look at sex discrimination against a male. She took several cases that were just small little steps, but over time amounted to a huge amount. Shrinking the change. Here's one that will maybe amuse you, given where you are, where you're from. What did the colonists call the areas that they occupied in our country in the 16th, 17th, 18th century? New York, New Jersey, New England. Virginia was named after one of the queens. They took names that were familiar. Here's another example of using familiarity to shrink a change. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. They knew that tune from England, right? God save the Queen. I don't know the real word, all the rest of the words. Shrinking the change is something I learned as a consultant. And there's many examples in the Hebrew Bible and among everyday people. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg comes to mind in terms of one step at a time. After all, it amounts to a lot, but you don't go for home run the first time.
That's a great principle. And it might be a tricky question, but taking that principle over to, let's say, a business or a team, have you got any thoughts about how you use that principle with them?
Shrinking the change?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done this and I've seen other consultants do it. I've learned from others. When it's a big change, I'll ask the leader, tell me if there's ever been a time in the past, whether you were here or not, where the whole organization or maybe just one unit made a similar change. Or if not a similar change, a change that required some of the same adjustments. Maybe it wasn't a change in how we deal with customers, but it's dealt with the same technological adjustments. And if you've got an example of that, let's talk about that when you talk with your staff about the change. The first thing we're going to say, of course, is why do we need this change? And it always helps there to cite comments from your staff, by the way. If the staff have been mumbling and grumbling about something, then it's not the boss coming in with a brand new vision that he woke up with one day. It's, hey, I've listened to you, which already gets people somewhat open. And once you talk about, I've heard you, and here's what I'm going to suggest, see if you can refer to a time or two and ask the staff to think of a time or two when they've done something similar. Now, maybe you're thinking, Thomas, that could be risky. What if it went to hell in the past? Okay, we don't want to do that again. We've had some practice. What did we learn? So that's an example of shrinking the change. This is a bit of a stretch, but not too much, I don't think. There's a lot of data that shows that when a leader invites people to make a change and there's a trusting relationship between the two, the person who's being asked to change is far more likely to try it. They're still going into the unknown. Their brain still may be saying to them, wait a second, this is uncertain. But I trust that person who's asking me. So what's been shrinking perhaps is the fear factor, is the worrisome factor. I know my boss, he or she's going to have my back. So trusting relationships can help shrink the change.
Would you mind touching on the two human needs, because I think it relates to this topic.
Great. Really glad you asked. A psychologist I know helped me with all kinds of parts of this book. No book is written just by one author, and if they say they did, watch your wallet. Even if you're not aware of it, if consciously aware of it, we're always pulling from things we got from others. So his name is Dave Waters. And I asked Dave one day, among other things, how do you deal with the fear of loss? Why did I go to Dave Waters? His life has been, as a clinical psychologist, about people who want to change or say they want to change. And what Dave tells me is one of the first questions they ask back to relationships, they don't ask this, but they wonder in their minds, Dave thinks this would be a good way to go forward. Will Dave be with me? They don't ever say it at the time. Maybe when they're finished with Dave and Dave says, by the way, did anything help? They would say, I had a sense you were always going to be ever there, every step of the way. So in terms of shrinking the change and the two human needs, what Dave taught me, among other things, is in a book he co-authored, he and his co-author learned that of the thousands of clients they had, Thomas, over decades, almost all of them had two fundamental needs. One was what Dave calls mastery, and one was called belonging. Mastery, or you could say competence. I need to be good at something. Maybe work, but not necessarily. What is mastery? It could be I'm a great parent. I'm a good member of the local society. I'm helping out. I'm volunteering. I'm a good person, and I'm teaching people in my church or synagogue what I'm doing. So competence, belonging is just what it sounds like. Here's what Dave found and what I find in my work. Dave found with his clients, he asked them to make a change. And if it pushes a button, a bad button, among either of those two fundamental needs, is this going to threaten my competency? Is this going to threaten my sense of belonging? It's going to be difficult. Let's say a man and a woman, married with kids, and the woman is complaining, and the two of them are seeing Dave, and the woman is complaining, he never listens to me. My spouse never listens to me. No wonder he does things with the kids that I don't agree with. And maybe the spouse thinks he's a pretty good listener. So right away, he's on the defense. I said, Dave, what would you suggest she say? It could be he's complaining about her. And this I just love, Thomas. He said, this is what I tell the clients if they're complaining and it's touching, threatening one of those two fundamental needs. He says, every complaint is really an unstated request. Every complaint is an unstated request. What does that mean, Dave? The woman is saying, you don't listen to me. What's the real request? You're important to me. Your opinion's important to me. I want you to listen to me because I've got a problem here and I would like your help. But when we're angry, we don't say that. We say, what's with you son of a bitch? So those two fundamental needs have been very helpful for me in thinking about the work I do. I do some coaching these days. And not unlike Dave, if I'm suggesting to someone I'm coaching, do you think it would help to go this way? I first ask myself, is one of those two needs going to be threatened? Here's an example. I'm talking with a guy right now, I'm coaching him, and he's thinking about a promotion that's being offered. He happens to have a growth mindset, but that's not the main thing. This is going to give him a far broader set of areas to explore. He knows he'll stumble at times, but he's excited. Why is he hesitating, Thomas? He'll be supervising people who are now his peers. What's the worry about loss? Belonging? They're going to report to him. Are they going to be as open with him? Probably not. Are they going to share, dark worries they have? Probably not. He doesn't want to lose those relationships. So that's the belonging need that's got him hesitating.
Well, I love the quote. I might have to use that quote about the unstated request. That's a complaint. I think that's probably going to be applicable in a lot of instances. Just coming back to the book, because we haven't quite covered it. Who is the book for, and who would most benefit from it?
It's a great question because I'm still trying to figure it out. It's got the word for in the title. So you might think the obvious answer is Jews or Jewish leaders. And I'm still trying to figure out how to promote and market the book, excuse me. I was also hoping when I wrote the book that it would be for leaders who might just simply be curious about, is there anything from ancient wisdom that's applicable today? As far as I can tell, there's not a lot of people who aren't interested in Judaism who are picking up the book so far. But there are lots of people who I care about who can benefit. And so I'm doing some book talks with synagogues, Jewish community centers, other Jewish organizations, Jewish principals, because they're always looking for guidance in terms of leadership. The book is really open to anybody who would like to improve their ability to lead. Let me just pause there for a second. I think you know this better than most, probably from all the interviews you've done, Thomas. Leadership is not necessarily a role. It's just something you can exert. If you're influencing someone, if you're moving something forward, you're in a leadership position or you're doing leadership. My dear wife, Jackie, the last thing she wants to do is be in front, but she's a great behind the scenes person who can move things forward. So if you'd like to improve your ability to lead things, lead people, if you'd like to improve your ability to take care of yourself during this crazy pandemic and time of upheaval, those are the people I think will benefit the most. I'm writing some blogs adapted from some idea in the book. And the one that got the most likes and comments on Facebook was a blog about taking care of ourselves and others during this pandemic. And at first I was surprised until I thought to myself, a lot of my friends are still 2.5 years into it saying they're struggling. Quick story. David Brooks is a noted New York Times columnist on the conservative side, not a Trumpian, someone I love to read even though I'm not a conservative because he's very principled. And one day on a nightly newscast, he was asked, David, how are you doing personally? Personally. This is maybe 6 months ago, Thomas. And he said, I'm struggling. Before the pandemic, I'd get up. I'm sort of ready to meet the day. I've got a lot of energy. I'm a morning person. My mind is crisp. He said, now I get up. I think maybe I should go back to sleep. Get out of bed. I don't feel sharp. I go to another room, he said, and I wonder, why did I go here? I've had moments like that. There's a lot of people who can relate. So that blog I wrote tapped that need. So I think people who are trying to figure out how to get through these tumultuous times and how to lead will benefit from the book.
I think it's an area that you do cover in the book is looking after other people. Did you want to add anything that you covered a subject in the book?
Yeah, if you're in an official, formal leadership role, there are some do's and don'ts now that have come out from not only my work, certainly, but some research. We've had enough time to research it. Communications is always important. More short communications is what people are finding now. If you used to have a staff meeting one day a week for an hour, that's fine. If it's on Zoom, no more than an hour, that's as much as people can handle. But every 2 or 3 days, a little bit of information sent out is very helpful. The second thing, show your concern for how people are doing. And that can be as simple as saying, how you doing? I'm not sure if you've seen this, Thomas. Since the pandemic, when people have asked me or I ask them, how are you doing? It's a totally different question than it used to be. It used to be kind of like, hey, bro. Now I really want to know, because we're struggling. So just tune in, especially if people are working from home or elsewhere and you're not seeing them. How you doing? Would you like to chat? A third thought, it's always helpful to play to people's strengths. In a time when a lot seems out of control, remember one of those 3 needs of the brain, not only certainty and predictability, but control. Give people at work a task that you know they can do and do well. It may not even be a priority, but we need things that we can get our arms around and feel good about. So you may say to somebody, why don't you put this project aside for a second? I'd like you to spend a few hours doing such and such, maybe such and such. Do it because I need it. I need your help on this. Most people love it when a boss says, I need your help. It's really 4 powerful words. I already mentioned trust is incredibly important anytime. It's challenging to keep trust now because as a leader, I may announce something on Monday and by Friday, the world has changed. Our federal officials have said, no, we don't do that anymore with regard to vaccines. How do you do strategic planning when things are so shifty? So openness and a bit of showing some modesty and vulnerability. Folks, when I said this to you 2 weeks ago, that was what I knew from everything I had learned. It's different. Maybe I made a mistake or what I said was valid, but here's the reason why it's no longer the fact. Being open, showing your humanity. Here's a lovely example. Sometimes, Thomas, the most powerful things can be relatively easy and short. An Israeli NGO, non-governmental organization that I visited with, the chair of the board after 2 months of the pandemic, so way back in 2020, and they were going to Zoom, and so they had to have shorter meetings because you can't meet for 3 hours, so they met more frequently. But he realized that there wasn't a lot of give and take the way they had been. Maybe that's just a function of Zoom, he thought. So he tried it. He just took a chance. He said, folks, I know that this is a tough time. We can't be together and we can't be together with friends and all. So let's take 5 minutes at the beginning of each meeting. I'm going to give each of you 2 sentences just to tell us, how are you doing? Could be business-wise, could be work, family-wise, personal. How are you doing? The second meeting, it made all the difference in the world. They went around. When it got to one person, the most respected person in the group, somebody with a national reputation around Israel, Thomas, he said, I don't need 2 sentences. I just need 2 words. I'm depressed. I wasn't there. People who were there told me, jaws dropped. This is someone who's in front of cameras. We've got this image of people being kind of superhuman when they're like that. He said, I'm depressed. The person who was in the room told me it changed the nature of the chemistry. Other people started to say more about how they're doing. They bonded more. So showing our humanity, making it safe for people to talk that way.
There's a lot there. So, and I also wanted to touch on something which you said, which our conversation today kind of illustrates to me that the book is going to be beneficial to everyone. So it's not just a niche that you're going for, but based on our conversation, I think it's obvious that lots of people can benefit from reading it. So I just wanted to add that in. Is there anything that I should have asked you about today?
I like that question. Yeah, there's a few, but let me just say one. One of the things in the last chapter of the book where I talk about how do we deal with the disruption, that's a kind of a sub-theme throughout, but the whole last chapter is specifically that, not just change, but disruptive change. One of the things I make 2 major points. One is the one I just said, we need to take care of ourselves and others. By the way, something I said earlier, like Go of Perfectionism, that's an example of taking care of yourself and others. Just be reasonable. The other part of that chapter, Thomas, just chat about for a minute or 2 is in every pandemic but one that I learned about, there's been 6 or 7 written about over the decades. In every pandemic but one, there were huge leaps in innovation. I think it was the Black Plague that was devastating Europe that led to the very beginnings of public health. People started to realize, geez, all this, the feces in the streets and the dirty water, and got to do something. It's always an opportunity for huge innovations. So what? So my answer to the so what question is, whether you're in an organization or just with family and friends, A, make it safe for people to offer innovative ideas. A colleague of mine who teaches creativity says, get rid of killer phrases. What's that? Killer phrases kill the discussion. The boss will never buy it as a killer phrase. We've never done it before as a killer phrase. We've always done it this way as a killer phrase. So make it safe for new ideas. There's a wonderful quote from, I forget who it was from, and the quote is, there's nothing about a caterpillar that will tell you that it'll become a butterfly. So a new idea may or may not look great at the beginning. Give people a chance to play with it. A quote from Picasso, a great painter. Picasso said, "Good painters borrow and great painters steal." And the notion there is there's only a few Steve Jobs in the world, a few Thomas Edisons or whoever your favorite inventors are. But we can take ideas that are perhaps getting some buzz elsewhere and adapt them to what we're doing. So if we make the workplace safe, get rid of killer phrases, allow people to have off-the-wall ideas, and give it a try. And if we find those ideas elsewhere and learn what they learned, so we're not just starting off by ourselves. And finally, if we understand that failure is just another chance to learn, the word failure really shouldn't be part of our vocabulary when it comes to innovation. Edison said something like, "I failed 900 times before I finally found how to make a light bulb." He didn't fail, he just learned what not to do the next time. So those are some things that can help with innovation. It's amazing to me how many innovative ideas have come along just because things are so crazy. And I'll finish with one of them. In the first summer of the pandemic, when we couldn't get close to each other, at least those who were taking the science seriously, there were cities in our country who were used to having a 4th of July parade. Well, you don't want thousands of people lined up shoulder to shoulder. You're going to have, outbreaks. So what did they do? I think a half a dozen cities I read about, Thomas, I'll finish with this. They created a reverse parade. What's that? The people who would have been in the parade are spread along the sidewalk. The band, the people twirling, the jugglers, whatever, they're spread along the sidewalk, the distance. And the people who wanted to watch are in the middle in their cars, slowly driving through. So they became the parade safely in their cars, watching the actual events that were on the sidewalk. Who would have thunk? I mean, would anybody have agreed to that before the pandemic? Are you kidding? Talk about killer phrases. They would have tossed that out in nanoseconds.
Oh, when you said what's a reverse parade, nothing came to me. So I'm glad you told me because I wouldn't have guessed that at all. And one question I ask everyone on the podcast is what does success mean to you?
Well, we're about to get into what in America we call football season. So success for me means my alma mater, the University of Michigan, wins on the football field. To tell you the truth, I haven't thought a whole lot about success during the course of my life. Maybe it's because how I was raised. My parents were very successful, but they were more interested in what I was doing that might be meaningful, what I was doing that might be helpful to others. I had the best teachers in my home because they, we're all imperfect parents, but they would model for me the kind of life they believed in. When my dad's company was down, that he would still give huge amounts to charity. Mom was our extended family's social worker because she was a social worker by training and she was a great listener. They said, find what you can do that's meaningful for you and for others. And so that's, I've really appreciated those lessons. And it's true about this book as well, Thomas. The other books I wrote, I've written 5 other books, and I was happy with them. They got nice reviews. That was great. Those were all from the head. This book, Thomas, I would wake up in the morning and run to the computer by 2 or 3. You shouldn't, as a writer, work more than 4 or 5 hours. I'd finish. I'd go to sleep thinking about ideas. I'd wake up writing them down. I was consumed. Probably not the greatest mate for my wife for those many months. The book got a hold of me. And when I finished, I finally realized why. It wasn't just about management and leadership. It had to do with values. It had to do with principles. It had to do with the teachings, both in the Hebrew Bible and amazing people like Colin Powell, I mentioned, Nelson Mandela. It really had to do with things that are so much more meaningful to me. I ended up thinking I kind of wrote a long love letter to my kids about what their dad valued. So I guess I think about those more than success.
So would it be fair to say that a successful life for you is one that's meaningful?
You can put it that way.
Good. Well, if people want to connect with you or buy the book, where do they go?
The title of the book is Loss and Discovery, What the Torah Can Teach Us About Change. I'll say it again, Loss and Discovery, What the Torah Can Teach Us About Change. It's sold by Amazon and other booksellers. My website is russlinden.com, and my email is russlinden1946@gmail.com.
Well, thank you for that. And I appreciate all the value today. I think you've been a great guest. So, Russ, thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and I appreciated your questions, Thomas. Be well.